hockey stuff, but I'm not sure. I could be wrong because it could be like
It could be a whole space.
Just want to say thanks again to everybody for being with us on this beautiful day. Our third annual Manship School Sports Summit will continue with our 10:30 panel here in just a few minutes. We just wrapped up our sports practitioner panel from 9 to 10, and our great Manship alums are next door in Hodges Hall, meeting and greeting with our student media representatives and all of our awesome outlets. So we're very appreciative of them, as well as our scholars, our friends in the industry, representing some great academic institutions. Even in Tuscaloosa, it's okay to say that. It's okay to say that. But our 10:30 panel will begin here shortly. Y'all, there's plenty of food, coffee, water behind you, snacks. I know the students are always hungry, so we appreciate y'all being with us here today. Staff members as well, we appreciate y'all.
Okay.
Just noticed
Check, check.
the brand, the park.
We're good. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for session 2 of the Manship School Sports Summit of this year, year 3. I am Dr. Josh Jackson, the assistant professor of sport communication here at the Manship School. Pleasure to see all of you here, both willingly and unwillingly. So I have the pleasure today of moderating our panel on the coverage of and the growth of women's sports from a more kind of scholarly perspective. So today I have some incredible research colleagues alongside me who I'll introduce in a moment. We're just going to kind of discuss what we've seen over these last 10 or so years, not just the growth of the WNBA, which is the obvious sport, but the involvement of women across sport ad nauseum. So I'll start on my right introducing Dr. Saran Sadri. Dr. Saran Sadri is an assistant professor in University of Alabama in their journalism and creative media department. To my left, Ms. Julia Richmond, Dr. Julia Richmond, is an associate professor, right? Assistant still? Okay. It's okay. Assistant professor at Rowan University, that is in New Jersey, for those of you that are not familiar. And then to our far left, we have Dr. Betsy Emmons, who joins us from University of Nebraska-Lincoln. As well. So we all do a lot of sports research. Some of it we've had the opportunity to do together. And we're excited to kind of talk to you guys today, again, about the growth of women's sport. Just a quick sidebar for my students, MassComm 2002, that sign-in sheet is in the back if you need it. Okay, so let's get started. Before talking about any of the scholarly research and getting into the numbers or the metrics, I wanted to just kind of just set the scene of our own personal investment in a topic such as this. So, Dr. Emmons, if we could start with you, just kind of walk us through a little bit of your experience with women's sports from a practical sense, what you enjoy, what you're watching now. Just kind of take us through that.
Okay. So my career background before I went to academia was actually working in sport public relations, and I worked at Las Vegas Motor Speedway in racing series, and that is where, and I was a racing fan growing up, and so getting to see that through the professional lens was fun. And that's a traditionally, all of those spaces in racing are traditionally male spaces. And so very aware of the fact that I was underrepresented, both professionally working at the Speedway and with the racers. So I carried that interest through graduate school, and it was actually the LSU dean, Dr. Kim Bissell, who helped me see ways I could research gender in sport. And so to this day, my most cited paper is one that I worked on under her supervision. And it was when social media was becoming popular. Being in a PhD program in the mid-2010s was an exciting time because social media was exploding in popularity, and studying what was happening I was right in the middle of it. And so this was a research project about how female athletes and male athletes self-present on Facebook. And so that visual analysis was such an eye-opening and interesting experience that I've turned that into an active research line I still pursue. And then I would say, talking about sports today, one of the most exciting sports experiences I had in 2025 was going to a Golden State Valkyries game in August. What an amazing experience. That's an expansion team. It was their first year, and it was a sellout, and the energy, and the team didn't even win the game, but just the energy behind that and the support that the city had for that team was just palpable, and it was a great experience to be a part of.
Excellent. Dr. Richmond, same question.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here today. I think that sports have always been in the background of my life. I grew up playing sports. I was the type of kid who would go out and play football, basketball, tennis, golf, whatever. And I never took seriously sports as a career path for me because a lot of people said, well, there's not many women in sports, kind of gently guiding me away from that opportunity. And so I always had sports, but even my dissertation only touched on the topic very, very briefly. It wasn't until I got my assistant professorship job that I fully looked at sports as a serious space of inquiry. And I feel overwhelmed by the amount of support that I have and the work still yet to be done, right? This isn't something that we're talking about in the past. There's still barriers for women and non-binary people. And so thinking about what sports means to me, I have a passion for it. I love competition. It speaks to what I want to write about. I think it talks a lot about who we are as humans when we engage in sports, whether that's the emotional component, the competitive component, the physical component of sports. I think that talks a lot to our humanity, and so I think it's an exciting area. It also happens in an exciting area for students as well, and so I'm fortunate to work in a place that I'm passionate about that still draws quite a few students who want to learn about sports and to think about it. And so my area is in public relations, which I think has a lot of room for social impact and kind of creating justice in spaces that otherwise wouldn't be talked about. So most exciting thing for 2025, I went to a Liberty game, and to see everyone in the stadium wearing women's jerseys was completely overwhelming to me. I don't know if I fully thought that was going to be overwhelming until I'm from Philadelphia. We don't have a WNBA team yet, but we're getting one, and I'm very excited. So to see people in women's jerseys at that level and that scale was overwhelming.
Thank you. Dr. Sadri.
Yeah, so I've just always been a big sports fan my entire life, both men's and women's sports. And when I started doing sports media research, I was really taken aback and really shocked by the lack of women's sports coverage. I mean, when I first looked at the numbers 7 years ago, 5% of all sports media coverage was dedicated to women. It's actually gotten better. It's actually tripled in coverage. So it's at this point now, when you factor in digital media, when you factor in social media, when you factor in broadcast media, it's about 15%. But that's still staggering in comparison to the media coverage for men. So just when I just looked at the numbers and as a fan, I just decided, this is something I have to look into. This is something I want to research, especially because so many of my students are women who want to go into this field, and was sort of the impetus for my research in the area.
Sure, absolutely. I think part of what we do as researchers is not only identifying what improvements are being made, but in order to do so, we have to identify what those barriers were and what those barriers continue to be. So Dr. Richmond, you kind of alluded to this. So we'll start this one with you. Just in your research and in your practical experience, what are some of those barriers that you have observed that have kind of decayed over time or maybe are still strongly existing that have allowed the involvement of women in sports to kind of grow over these last few years?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think one of the pieces that you can look at is infrastructure. So is there investment at the youth level? Is there investment in the middle school, the high school, college, and beyond? And are those investments being made? I was recently at the International Conference in Sports, and the panel was talking about that investments, while there's a huge audience in women's sports, the investment isn't there. Investors are slow to jump onto this, and they are coming little by little, but it's not coming as rapidly as you would hope. I strongly recommend Jane McManus's book, The Fast Track, where she looks at and she tracks how coverage is created and the kind of investment that is in that space. And so I think having investors that are clear about women's sports and what women's sports can be, but then also providing support not just for the professional levels, but then also the lower levels of the amateurs to kind of grow that community,
Sure.
I would say.
Good. Dr. Sadri, any additional barriers that maybe you've observed in your research from the media space?
So I've done a lot of research on women sideline reporters, specifically looking at sort of what their take is on the profession, mainly because they're one of the most forward-facing, most visible women in sports media. And it was really interesting to me, sort of just to get their feedback, because I've done a lot of extensive interviews with a lot of them about the barriers that they face, not just from fans like Twitter trolls and people like that, but from the people that they actually work with. One of them that I talked to, and this is actually a direct quote, and I want to quote her directly because I was just so kind of taken aback by this. But she said, I've worked with some really good producers, and I've worked with some producers that have really hindered my growth. I think it's on a good producer to make it a team and not treat the sideline reporter as what the public perception is. They're not calling the men kiddo. They're calling me kiddo. And to be quite frank, I'm a 35-year-old mother. So to be called kiddo on a daily basis is strange. If we stick up for ourselves, you're seen as a bitch or being moody. So that was actually a direct quote from a woman that, from a female sideline reporter that I interviewed. And it really kind of goes to show sort of the barriers. I mean, we've made a lot of progress, but there's still a lot of additional progress that needs to be made.
Absolutely. Dr. Emmons, anything to add there?
I would absolutely agree with both Julie and Sean's assessment. And I think something I have found interesting, because I also teach sport media courses, and when I ask students what they want to do with their career, a lot of my women broadcasters will say, I want to be a sideline reporter. And my next question is, well, why don't you want to do play-by-play? Why don't you want to sit in the press box and be one of the main hosts? And in a way, that's self-limiting. I love that we're having more women when we're seeing women play sports from a young age, and that becomes normalized. Why can't play-by-play be the goal as well? And so encouraging that, don't self-limit yourself. That's okay. Like, you can do this too. And so I think both of those are important things. And I also think the streaming era is doing some important things, because those locked in contracts with those big sports, the NFLs, the NASCARs, the Major League Baseballs, streaming is there. And we get to self-drive interest by what we're watching, which can then move the needle into those media contracts and what are people watching and interested in.
Moving into a conversation about digital media, we are now at a point where not just on the collegiate level, but also on the professional level, these athletes are their own brands. And on top of that, they have a certain identity that they are trying to manage through their various social media accounts, whether they are actually run by them or they're run by their assistants or what have you. So when it comes to that conversation about women in sports, how do we think the utilization of social media has played into the propagation of this entire movement kind of excelling at that rate? Dr. Emmons, we'll start with you here.
So University of Nebraska has a nationally ranked volleyball program, and I did not know until I came to the University of Nebraska just how big a deal this team was. So we actually have several multimillionaire influencer / volleyball players at the university, and that is amazing that that opportunity is there for them. So watching that, it's just completely upended the opportunity. So the social media influencing opportunity, the way that you can monetize yourself, every single athlete is a media brand, that has been amazing.
Dr. Sowdry.
Yeah, I mean, I think social media has provided so many avenues for so many athletes to sort of build their brand in a way that didn't really exist 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, and especially with the NIL space now. A lot of these athletes, they grew up with social media. They know how to use it. They don't need to be trained in it in the same way that I think athletes used to be trained in how to interact with the media. Now they basically are their own media brand, and they can actually create their own content. And a lot of them are better at creating content than people who work in social media. So I think that's one of the interesting things about it is there are people who have 1 million, 2 million, 3 million TikTok followers, and basically they have $1 million NIL contracts before they even get to campus. So I think that's an interesting aspect of sports media that we really haven't even been able to research because it's so new.
Sure. Dr. Richmond?
Yeah, I would say if you look at it from the fan perspective, there is a practice within fan consumption where you're expected to have 2 screens going, where you're probably watching the game, and if you're at home, you're probably scrolling either TikTok, social media, whatever it is. And so that content is really powerful as a supplement to the traditional event of the game. And so there is that pressure for athletes to put out content and to be a brand in and of themselves, which is tough when you're also having to engage in sports and compete. So I give them a lot of credit for that. But I also think too, I study social media. I've studied social media for about 10 years now, and the things that people say on the internet can be horrible. And I think that in this conversation around media and athletics needs to be a real conversation about mental health and media preparedness, because I still say, for as many years as I've studied this, I don't know if I would be able to handle some of the backlash that these younger athletes are getting. And it's just because they're visible and they have a lot of clout within their sport. They asked to play their sport. They wanted to be the best at their sport. They didn't also want to be an enormous media brand. And I don't know, I think it provides an outlet for athlete perspective. Certainly, Instagram provides an outlet for athletes to talk about what's going on in ways that players in the 90s didn't necessarily have, but it also provides a medium for talk back from the public. And if you have a fandom that is highly engaged, and we know fans are highly engaged publics coming from a public relations perspective, if they're highly engaged, they're going to be reaching out on social media, and that can be a very difficult position. And a lot of times you see this language being gendered, this language, you see doxing, you see stalking, all sorts of things happening online. And so the media space is important to watch because it creates patterns of behavior where fans and athletes are engaging with social media and traditional mass comm outlets. But it's important to know that that's a new challenge. It's not a new challenge, but it's a old challenge in a new way. Having a device that constantly is saying maybe something pretty negative about your performance, that can be really tough.
I would love to expound on that a little bit. Two things that I was thinking about. Julie raised such an important point. So Harper Murray is one of our star volleyball players, and she was stalked at an airport based on social media information she had put out about the flight that they were going to be on. And so someone approached her at the gate, and it was an incredibly frightening experience. And what it was a man who wanted her to sign autographs. And he'd cornered her. And she felt very uncomfortable and said, I just needed to sign the autographs to get him out of my face. And that's something we need to be talking about in social media and protecting yourself and privacy. So I think that was a really important point. And I had a second point, and it'll come back to me.
No
We have
problem.
time.
We have plenty of time. Continuing in that conversation of digital media, I think that it is really interesting. You're speaking to this about the popularity of certain athletes. I am a sports person. My sister is not, for example. And my sister, no matter how much I try to get her to get into a sport, she can't seem to care about it one way or the other. But when somebody like Flau'jae Johnson comes to an LSU, for example, she doesn't know that she's a women's basketball player. She sees Flau'jae as a social media influencer, a rapper, somebody that was on America's Got Talent. So it's everything else around her. Whereas I feel like for a number of people in this room, we think of her as women's basketball player first, all of those other parts of her identity second. So in us talking about the different facets of a woman's identity, especially a female athlete's identity, how does that social media aspect play into it, and what kind of nuances can we glean from being able to engage with one part of their identity but potentially not another part of them? Sean, we can start with you there.
So I look at it a lot from the female reporter, female sports reporter, female media perspective. And I know a lot of them, I mean, they're building their brand based on like their social media following. Because I mean, really, you're not going to get hired in as a sports reporter if you don't have enough followers and you haven't put out enough content for a sports media organization to want to hire you. And a lot of them, I mean, especially when it comes to women, they're like the Twitter trolls will attack them in ways that the men don't. In ways that there's no equivalent really for men, because they will attack their credibility, they will attack their knowledge. Many of them have told me that like they will mention to someone that they're a sports reporter, and then like a man will start quizzing them on sports and say, you know what, like, do you actually know sports? And it's things like that it's not just that they have to because of social media and because there's so much negativity out there. It's not that they just have to build their brand in the same way that a male sportscaster would, but they also have to go beyond, sort of go even further. And so I think that's an interesting aspect of it. When it comes to female athletes, I think they deal with a lot of vitriol that that the male athletes deal with, but then even further, I have football players in my classes and at the University of Alabama. Like it's great when they win. I mean, people are in their DMs yelling "Roll Tide," but then as soon as they lose, as soon as they miss a block, I mean, it's over. And they've showed me their Twitter DMs and their Instagram DMs, and it's really, really, really bad. And for women, I think it's not just the negativity, but then there's the gendered aspect of it, which takes it to an even more negative level.
Dr. Richmond, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I was thinking about that in terms of the NCAA just put forward an initiative to get people to stop going into Venmo to request money that they've lost from gambling. And I don't know if that's like an initiative for Venmo or if this is a real problem, but it's something I would have maybe never thought about had I not read about it in the newspaper. You talk a little bit about intersectionality, and I think you were talking about it from different hobbies and how humans express themselves in an artistic way versus athletic way versus academic. But I think it's also worthwhile to mention kind of intersectional feminism here and the experience of being part of a minoritized group online is going to be different as well. And so I think women have a lot of challenges. And the idea that you're going to be quizzed when you're a woman in sports is very real. That is something I have experienced almost annually, where somebody will ask me a quiz question or a quizzo question for me to then take up space in a sports environment. And it's disappointing.
Dr. Emmons.
So I remembered what I was going to say for the last time, and it tied to that. And that is the expectation that every athlete be a brand. And if there was a New York Times article back in April, definitely Google it when you can, about this era and how it is very uncomfortable for athletes who are not. They don't want to be out there authentic, here's what I ate for breakfast today every morning. That's just not their personality. And that there's a concern they're getting left behind. And is that fair? And so that also ties to the women on social media aspect and the different pressures, because a project I'm working on right now about youth motorsports racers and development teams is that at some point, every teen woman racer has to navigate the sexual attractiveness issue, and boy racers do not. That is the research that's what we're finding in the results, and sadly, that mirrors the same research that I did in Dr. Kim Bissell's class in 2014, that the women athletes have to navigate their sexual identity in a way that men do not.
That's good. You speak about youth sports, which is a good transition to my next question. When we had the opportunity this past summer to take a group of students to London for a study abroad, they had an opportunity to meet with women's rugby for England, right? And their marketing team kind of broke down their campaign for the upcoming Women's Rugby World Cup for England, saying rugby, it's for the girls. Like, that's their whole kind of approach in allowing younger women to be exposed to rugby and say, this isn't just a contact sport that's for the strong masculine boys, you can play this too. So just in kind of your experiences, almost relating back to the barriers question, how do we go about having these sports and having these avenues open for women at a younger level and making it to where it's not, this is something that's for the boys, this is something that is for everybody, and we can open these avenues for people across the gender spectrum. Mm-hmm. We can start with you, Dr. Emmons.
Supporting it, making it visible, making it known. I think having these conversations is also important. Being aware that girls have to navigate this in a way that boys do not. I think the NFL's investment in women's flag football is very interesting. I'll be excited to see what that looks like as the years go by, but that's, I think, just having those conversations and women saying, hey, I'm dealing with this, and, you know, having support also from male athletes who are like, yeah, that's the camaraderie of being athletes together, and the fact that that's an extra issue for a women athlete that is not there for a male athlete. Just those conversations among one another in the community as well.
Yeah, I think community is huge. rugby is very popular in Philadelphia, and it is women's rugby, and they have events that are associated with rugby, outside of rugby, and they're very, very popular. And it's because there's a strong community around it. I think I think it's the most powerful space for women's sports to flourish because it's the most authentic. People who engage in women's sports, they can organize and create what makes sense for their sport, for their community. We see bars opening up that are dedicated just to women's sports, and they look different than traditional sports bars. And I think that is because it is informed by the community that is actually engaging in these sports. And so it's a lot to ask people to do community organization. It is tedious, and relationships are hard to build and maintain, especially as life happens. But if there's a collective action, and I'm very proud of Philadelphia in the ways that women's sports are developing. And it can start with youth, but it also starts with when you go to a field, you see adult women playing sports, you see adolescent girls playing sports. It's really powerful to have that visibility. I think you do what you see, and so if you're a young girl seeing adult women play rugby, that feels more like an option to you than maybe it had previously.
Makes sense. Dr. Sadri?
And the other thing that I will add is even beyond just community involvement and support from communities and other athletes, I think also the media has to play a role in this, and that means broadcasting it on ESPN or ESPN Plus, broadcasting it on their social media channels. That means putting it in a forum where young athletes, young women are actually going to see it. So I mean, whether those are like 20-second, 30-second TikTok clips or 2-hour broadcasts of women's rugby. I think being able to put it in the media so that people are actually seeing it on their phones, on their TV screens, I think that will also help bring sort of elevate women's youth sports.
Absolutely. This next question kind of focuses more on the conversation of polarization. And in this, we've already kind of discussed some of the barriers that exist for women that operate in and around sport, and the way that some of these stereotypes and archetypes are kind of depicted and thrust upon them. Kim Mulkey is the example that I'm thinking of here, right? Those of you that are familiar with Coach Mulkey and how she operates, she's a winning coach. She's won pretty much everywhere that she goes, but she is not everyone's favorite person for a variety of reasons. But in some of the research that I've done, I think Dr. Richmond, you've done some of this research as well, we found that some of that vitriol is not inherently warranted. It is kind of charged up and using her gender as a way to kind of unleash venom solely off of the fact that she is somebody that wins and is someone that is a little more outspoken than maybe the standard college women's basketball coach. It's her and Gino and maybe one or two others that are really vocal in that space. So I say all that to ask, what do we make of those moments, whether that be in the media or on social media, where it seems that people are using moments to nitpick against a specific woman, saying that you shouldn't be like this. Mm-hmm. You are expected to perform or behave in a certain way and fit into this mold. And obviously that happens in a way that we don't often do with male coaches and male athletes across the board. So what do we make of this?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it's one that's going to continue. One of the things that I would say strongly in this forum is women's sports needs to be taken seriously. It needs to be a serious competition. This isn't an afterthought. This isn't a talking point. Women's basketball is basketball. Like that, I feel that very adamantly. And so I think that can be tough when you're trying to make space. They want you to seem very nice and agreeable. And so I have my issues with Kim Mulkey, but when I did my internet research, I looked at the responses to her press conference where she was talking to Kent Babb about the Washington Post article that was looming, and you see the gendered language there. It's there. The things that were said were not the things that would have been said to a male coach, and that's the reality of it. I think that there are fair critiques against Kim Mulkey, but the gender component continues to exist.
Okay, absolutely. Dr. Sadri?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with that. I think that, especially when it comes to female coaches, I mean, a male coach could scream at a player on the sidelines and no one bats an eye. When a female coach does it, I mean, to one of her female athletes, it causes a lot of controversy. I mean, you will see the clip on ESPN, you'll see the clip on Twitter. So it is that sort of gendered aspect that female coaches are expected to act a certain way, in a way that's sort of contradictory to coaching. And I mean, sometimes coaches will just yell at their players because they're trying to get the best out of them. But I think when it comes to Kim Mulkey, for example, I mean, she's accomplished a lot, and I think people, because she's a woman, they expect her to act a certain way, have a specific political stance, and if she deviates from that, then she's going to be criticized for it. So I think it's an interesting case study to look at, and I'm glad that both of you are actually looking at that.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Emmons?
Someone who's taken that concept, what is a woman, what is acceptable women athlete behavior, is Riley Gaines. She's turned that into, her empire is not done, so these conversations are continuing. Like, I heard she's running for office. I don't know if is that confirmed that she's running for office? I don't know. But the transgender issue and her opinion on that has really galvanized conservatives, especially around transgender athletes. And so that concept of what is an acceptable woman athlete, she's in the middle of it and still is.
Looking ahead a little bit, right? What are you guys working on right now across looking at those gender lines, if you're comfortable with sharing any of that research, and building upon that, not only what are you researching, but in a practical sense of our media space, our PR space, our advertising space, what are you hoping to see from the next 5 to 10 years of growth in women in sport? Let's start, Dr. Sadri.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I know you and I have worked on a study where we were looking at comparing female and male sports broadcasters and looking at their credibility. And I've looked at it from the perspective of an experiment. I've looked at it from the perspective of biometrics. And if you're not familiar with what that is, basically we hook up we measure your skin conductance, your eye tracking, your emotional affect to sort of see like how you will react to a male broadcaster versus a female broadcaster. And one of the things that we actually found was that female viewers are actually have less of an emotional affect towards female announcers. Like female viewers actually prefer male announcers. So that's one of the things that we're looking at, and sort of how do we even get women to feel as strongly and find women as credible in the sports media space as men. And I think that's one of the interesting things that I'm looking at now, to sort of see how does credibility change. Like, is it getting better now that we're seeing a lot more women in these sportscasting roles beyond just the sideline reporter role? Now they're front facing, they're doing play-by-play. So looking at things like that, that's one of the things that I've been researching. Also, AI, I'm looking at sort of AI anchors and sort of comparing AI anchors, not just in sports, but like human anchors versus AI anchors, and sort of comparing the credibility in that sense. Because now we're now seeing news and sports, and the anchors in the anchor profession being sort of overtaken. So we'll see where that all goes, but that's sort of the next stage.
Interesting. Okay, Dr. Emmons.
I just finished a story about athlete activism and conservative women student athletes because Nebraska, as a red state, had an abortion initiative back in 2024. And there were 5 women athletes, 4 softball players and 1 volleyball player, who actually recorded a video in promoting. There were 2 anti-abortion initiatives, and the one that was most conservative was the one that the women supported. And I think this is a very fascinating space because that was the first presidential election after NIL, and so watching how athlete activism and political issues are going to coincide that's not going anywhere.
Yeah, I'll take the what's in the future question. Looking back at 2020, my students will often say the time that COVID-19 became real was when sporting events stopped taking place. And so I hope that the power of sports can be used to have conversations around what a woman's experiences. And so I look at someone like Allison Felix, who is really leading the way in conversations around maternity leave and athlete activism. I want to see that become real for people, and that's not just a conversation we're having in sports. It's something that we're talking about more largely, because that's the impact of sports. That's why we study it. It is so powerful and influential in getting things on the national political agenda, even the international political agenda. And so I hope that is the ways that women's sports are moving. In terms of the research component, I've been thinking a lot about sports washing and how sports has been used to cleanse images of either governments or corporations. And so thinking of sports as a way to manage a crisis from an organizational perspective. So an example of how this intersects with the study of women's sports, when Greg Norman was first talking about Liv Goff, he said that it was the #1 supporter for women's golf, which it might have been true, but it didn't feel kind of authentic. And so looking at women's sports is used as a weapon against either other groups or to clean an image is kind of the convoluted way of how I'm thinking about sports washing and what I see my next research project being as I look forward after tenure, hopefully.
You'll get that. One final question before we open it up to the floor for questions, if there are any. We kind of talked about this a little bit, but the idea of the parasocial relationship, right, especially when it comes to women in sport, the idea that we, because of these devices that we have in our hands, we have more access and more knowledge to these athletes than ever. Just in your experiences, what have you seen, both pro and con, of this kind of deepening of this parasocial relationship? And I saw something a couple nights ago. I think Bam Adebayo had a press conference after the game, and they asked him about his relationship with A'ja Wilson, of course, and that was one of the few times that he's really been asked about that relationship outside of TMZ and what have you. But I strongly remember after almost every Las Vegas Aces press conference, there was some sort of question alluding to her relationship with Bam Adebayo. So there's this, even not only on a social media level, but on a practical person-to-person level, we even have reporters that are asking about, who are you dating? How is that going? And it's the inverse of that Travis Kelce, Taylor Swift dynamic, right? But this time we have 2 athletes. So I think their case is very interesting. So when it comes to that parasocial relationship, people feeling like they have access to these athletes and that they know them to this level, what are we making of this, and where potentially could we be headed with this growth of the parasocial relationship? Anybody can start with that one. I know it's a little loaded.
I'll go. Why not?
Yeah.
You'll bear with me if this isn't the most cohesive. I've seen it manifest in different ways, right? A lot of times I will have students who says, well, she does it, I can do it too. And that's a really great use of a parasocial relationship where, okay, they get up, they grind, I'm gonna get up and I'm gonna grind. So it can be inspiring. But then also this kind of strange thing happens where, and I see it a lot when I'm talking to my college students about college athletes, where they have this parasocial relationship, but then that mythic space goes into play where, oh, well, they have everything and they're amazing. And I think that can be dangerous, of course, right? And we've already talked extensively about how social media is a platform for this kind of conversation directly with athletes, and that can be dangerous for all of the reasons that we've talked about. So I don't want to completely discount what is good about having connection, mediated connection, but it's also very dangerous, especially if there's over-attachment.
Sure. Dr. Emmons?
I'm still thinking. There's a lot there. Sean?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, parasocial relationships. Before social media, there really weren't parasocial relationships with athletes in the way that we think of them now. Because really, the only real connection we had to athletes was seeing them on the field, seeing them on the court, and then seeing them in an interview after. But now we get to see every aspect of their life. For those that choose to broadcast that on social media to their followers, they have Instagram lives basically talking to their followers, talking to their fans and things like that. So I think people will just inherently just develop these relationships with people that they've never met, but they feel connected to them in some sort of way because, hey, they're a fan of them, they grew up in the same city, they have the same workout routine or something like that. So I think it's interesting to sort of see how that's going to manifest, because I think because of social media and as athletes, a lot of them get more and more open about what they're doing. I think people are going to just continue to get more and more connected in the same way that people, like when Taylor Swift started dating Travis Kelce and now they're engaged, and like people are just interested in it. And if you were a fan of Travis Kelce or a fan of Taylor Swift, or a fan of the Chiefs or a fan of the NFL, like you're going to be invested in this because you're just invested in their lives through social media.
I think expectation violation maybe is what I think both of you addressed that so well, and that through parasocial relationships we have this expected interaction when we see the athletes in person, and going to student athletes, and I'm using Harper Murray a lot. She's a very prominent figure in Nebraska athletics right now because she's such a good volleyball player, but also because she puts so much of her life on social media. She TikToks just about every day, and sometimes multiple times a day. And so she actually had a rough patch, and she had an ESPN article written about her where she was shoplifting after they had their volleyball season didn't end the way they wanted to, and she'd done a couple self-destructive things that teenagers do. But when you're on TikTok every day and you have people watching your every move, that expectation violation, she had fans turning on her. You're representing our university and you're embarrassing us. And so she actually had to have she had to take some time away, reassess, and then went back to the media and said, yeah, that was not appropriate of me. I didn't handle things in a healthy way. So I think that's where I land on that with parasocial relationships. That's really hard. Yeah. We're asking a lot of our youth athletes, for sure.
I know I said one more question, but I lied. One more for the one more. Just really quickly, for all four of us, what is one kind of sport or one area where you hope to see more women's involvement coming up in these next couple of years? And I can take this because there's an example that came up for me. It's Formula One. I think that there's such an American investment in Formula One right now, right? The inclusion of the Cadillac team, but all of us sitting through COVID and watching Drive to Survive, and now we have all of this investment. There are female drivers that are coming up through Formula 3 and Formula 2 and eventually hopefully into Formula 1. I think now is a very ripe time for that. And a lot of the paddock reporters, a lot of the ones that are on the sidetrack and are reporting, even the ones that are reporting for the actual teams now, some of them are hiring specifically like women to do that reporting. So I would really love to see if we can't make football more female friendly for a while, and it takes time to kind of de-establish all the learned behavior that we have in such a masculine sport like that. I think a place that is already growing like Formula One is a great avenue for us to have more women jumping in. So I hope they take advantage of that. If anybody from the FIA and Formula One is watching that. So yeah, Dr. Emmons, where would you like to see some more
I
involvement.
love that you said that. I agree. There's actually a group called Women in Motorsports based in Indianapolis, and some prominent women, Cindy Sisson, the Unser family, are really putting some time and money behind promoting the next generation of women in motorsport. And then, of course, Susie Wolf's F1 Academy. She's doing great things. And then, of course, we have Ken Block's daughter, Leah Block, who's active in rally racing and also is part of F1 Academy. Seeing these women, young women, going into professional racing is wonderful. So I'm a big proponent of F1 Academy. There are definitely barriers, not just money, but also gender barriers. So I'm loving it.
Dr. Sadri?
Yeah, one sport that I would really like to see grow, and we actually now in Alabama, we actually have an all-girls flag football league in like at the high school level. So honestly, seeing the growth of flag football, I think it's a sport that I think is growing in terms of like you're seeing it more at the youth level, and you're now seeing it at the high school level. So actually having girls. All girls flag football leagues, I think, would be really interesting, and it's like I've seen it in Alabama, and there's no reason to think that it can't expand and expand to every state.
Okay, my first answer is football, but since we've addressed that, I guess I'll go into golf. I think golf is one of those spaces that's incredibly gendered. While you play the sport, you're constantly reminded that you're at a different tee than your male counterparts. I also think that we need to take more of a longitudinal understanding of sports, that this is not something that you do until you're 25 and then you kind of give up on your athletic pursuits. And golf is one of those sports that you can play your entire life. It can also it gets you out in nature, and so I think tennis is also a sport that you play your entire life, but I would like to see more women in golf myself.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. Questions from the audience for any of our researchers? We have Ms. Caroline Tarver with the microphone. We start back, Caroline.
Hey y'all, I'm Skylar. Dr. Emmons, you mentioned that you see a lot of athletes that don't necessarily want to be involved in the social media space. And I never really thought about it like that because, you know, we see all these athletes on social media all the time. But it's like, yeah, these athletes that don't want to share their lives like that are really being pushed out of the space. So are there any ways that y'all are researching to help those athletes still have a good image?
So a project I'm working on right now, which is a very lengthy project because I'm studying 13 to 18-year-olds. And so institutional review boards very smartly have additional safety protocols when you study minors. And so through that process, I want to find out where is this happening, because professionalization of athletes is now at the high school level. We know this. And so that means our middle school students are having to think about self-branding. And we're already seeing how hard that is for student athletes in college. So what is happening? So I'm studying that space. I'm in the very early stages of it. But anecdotal evidence from teens are things that we would expect, that you're getting, you know, DMs, icky DMs, and, you know, you had a breakup with a girlfriend or a boyfriend, and it's like, oh, I've got to put that on social media now. People are going to be talking about it. Do I? And then the trolls who post comments. There's a lot there. We're not having these discussions as much as we need to.
This is a question for Dr. Emmons. Just the crazy rise in Nebraska volleyball specifically over the past few years. I'm curious as to your opinions on the trends you've seen in coverage of Nebraska volleyball versus other NCAA volleyball programs.
Oh, that's such a good question. So it's biased since I'm in Lincoln, so it's all Nebraska all the time. But I think, so what I think is really cool with the Big Ten Network, and again, having all of these different avenues now that we have with the ways we can consume sports has just been so amazing, because you can always find those Big Ten games. And so, and what I think is really cool that I never knew, having come from the South, was those volleyball games, every single game sells out. Men, women, they know the rules of the game. They have cheers and chants. And so, yes, women's sports can absolutely be as electric as any man's sport.
Other questions for the group? It's okay.
Hi, here in the back. I just had a question for the whole panel. I'm curious to know, have you guys seen any change within the last year with your work for funding, accessibility, just with the political scope, and how has that sort of changed the meaning of your work with the inclusivity in sports when we're seeing, a group of people working against that, and how has that changed the meaning of your work?
Oh boy. Okay. I can go first.
You go first.
I got it. I can go first. I'm not gonna lie to you and pretend like it's not hard. I think each of us coming from a different state, we are all facing very kind of different barriers when it comes from that. Here in Louisiana, a lot of those barriers are coming from the very top level and are kind of just trickling down. Transparently, I'm very fortunate here in the Manship School to have great support, both from our leadership as well as the additional faculty, where I don't feel like I need to really skirt around any of the issues that I like to research. I am a person where I believe identity is what makes us, and we should embrace those factors. So whether it is gender, it is race, it is your religious affiliations, the parts that make you you are what make our whole life interesting. So instead of shying away from that, I've actually been encouraged to continue to research that. Strategically, I do have to phrase some things in a certain way so that they don't get flagged by the internet when they come up. But that's a small price to pay to where I don't have to compromise the integrity of my work. I know what my messages are. I know what I'm looking to find in some of these places. And I'm just very thankful to be in a situation where I still have the support and the academic freedom to do so while I still have it.
I will echo that. I mean, I haven't really had to change my approach to research to be less diverse or anything like that. I mean, I do the research that I want to do because I think it's very valuable, and I think it's important to embrace diversity in the scope of sport. And I haven't really had to change anything, and I'm just full speed ahead with it. And when it comes to whether it's gender in sports, whether it's like sexual orientation, whether it's political affiliation, anything really, I mean, if it's worth being studied, I think you should take the time to study it.
Thank you so much for that question. There's a lot of different directions we could take this. I'm not going to talk about research, but maybe the impact of my research. I was part of a team that put together a National Endowment for the Humanities grant for a new minor at Rowan University that was going to be at the intersection of sports communication and history. And explicitly, we were talking about social impact. The first year we were funded, we went up to the second year and we were desk rejected, meaning I don't even think they read it. They saw what the title was and threw it out. And I think for me that requires me, as you're speaking, you have to get strategic. Who else is going to? The work doesn't stop mattering because someone says it doesn't matter anymore. It just doesn't. And I think that is so important to remember. So how do we get creative? And I'm trying to frame it in my mind that this is an opportunity for me to be creative, to find new partners, but it's frustrating too. Mm-hmm. It's really frustrating. It's about 3 years of work that is no longer, I can repackage it, but it's no longer viable. And so it can be frustrating. And I think part of it is also having a strong support network. If you find somebody who is inspiring and who is working with you, you're going to have a bad day, and some days you have to lean on your colleagues to try to rally to continue this work, because it doesn't stop being important just because someone says it doesn't.
Yeah. Dr. Emmons.
So for the motorsports research, working with the private foundations has been an avenue because there is vested interest in women in motorsport. And motorsport's a very expensive sport. But also beyond the money, there's other barriers. And so having those private foundations has been helpful. I haven't looked for federal government funding. I probably would be wasting my time. I think there are some state interests though too, like a good athletic infrastructure is good for a state. So I have not pursued that, but I have been told. I have colleagues who have been successful with that. Esports, by the way, has been a growth area. And so I have a colleague who got some funding through the state because developing esports is a growth opportunity.
Just piggyback on all of that, I think for all of us, going back to Dr. Richmond's point, part of this is about merit, right? Like what the merit of the research is. There are some people that are bad actors and just do things because they can do things and they want to start a buzz and they want to create some chaos, not good trouble, like actual chaos. I think, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn for any of the four of us, but we do the good. And what we're trying to find in our research are ways that can bring us together and help us understand why sports is this place that my students hear me say this all the time, it's this place that brings us together in such a special way that doesn't really occur in almost anything else that happens, at least in this country. And to see the way that it breaks cultural lines, it breaks racial lines. I'm very bad at Spanish. I got as far as Spanish 1152 here at LSU and got no greater than that. But I can't speak it, but if I understand soccer. And if I go to another country, I may not be able to speak their language, but if I go inside of Copa and I'm looking at a match, I know what's going on, and the people around me know that I know what's going on, and we're all cheering and celebrating for the same thing. You don't have that effect in a lot of other places, right? So sports is this magical place where we can continue to do that good work. It is a place that is inherently political. Historically, it always has been. It is a place where it is a microcosm of every chaotic little thing that we worry about in our modern society. But it is also a really great place for us to get answers to those things under the guise of touchdowns, points being scored, baskets, and everything else. So I think a lot of it is, what's the merit of the work that we're doing? And I'd like to think that all four of us and our fellow colleagues that are out there are doing some work that is of some really good merit. We got time for one final question, if there is one.
Hi, so on the topic of sport washing and corporations using this to manage crises, I was hoping to get Dr. Richmond's point of view. How can we distinguish between authentic social progress in women's sports involving companies or corporations and strategic sport washing?
That's a great question. Thank you so much for that. I think there's two answers to that. One, it's going to be difficult to parse out what an organization's true nature is or true intent is. I would be willing to bet it's to make money often. But there's another question of to what extent does it matter? If sports is being used to hide or conceal a moral transgression, that's important. If sports being used and they're going to have this promotion for women, but it's not, you feel like it's more money making, but it's actually going to help, local kids have access to a basketball court, I'm all for it. So I think it's definitely case by case, and it's an emerging area of research, but it's one to continue to question or not assume that the power of sports will always be used for good. Sometimes it is going to be used negatively. And if you are, as a researcher like myself, if you are too close to the sport and completely engulfed in the fandom, you might miss some of the issues that are underlining. And so the first call is to always be critical, to not just assume that any investment in women's sports, let's say for an example, is a good investment or one that we want to continue to pursue. And so having that critical eye is incredibly important, especially right now when we're seeing this surge in women's sports where some foundational work is going to be done that we will see in 20, 30 years down the line, making sure that foundation is strong. And it's a tough question, and that's why I don't like to research any easy questions. And so I'll keep you posted on how the literature review continues to develop.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. We appreciate all of you. Our researchers will hang out if anybody wants to ask us any kind of individual questions, how we got started on our PhD journeys, any of that good stuff. We'll take a break on the summit for a couple of hours. We'll reconvene at 1 o'clock for our State of NIL panel. We hope to see you all there as well. Thank you.
That'll be so interesting, State of NIL.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Hi. Yeah. Oh my gosh.